Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. This is Jen Ross, your Agritourist podcast host. I can't resist a great conversation about chocolate and cacao farming. I had the pleasure of interviewing someone I met at the very beginning of her cacao journey, a real powerhouse and innovator at the time, who I met on my first chocolate trip to Belize, the one with the howler monkeys and the jungle cabana. Emily Stone came on the cacao scene in Belize in 2010, made a tremendous impact to the lives and livelihood of cacao farmers in Belize, and 15 years later is now running a much larger, global, certified B Corp public benefit corporation that interacts and impacts cacao farmers throughout the world. We rarely get a chance to see someone at the beginning of their journey and then get to connect with them 15 years later and get to talk about the extraordinary impact of those 15 years, with much more to come in the future. Emily's story is impactful, her drive is contagious, and her desire for transparency, equity, and justice is admirable and will hopefully inspire the next set of Emily Stones to step up and tackle the many needs that exist in today's world. Thank you, Emily and team, for all you do and what you continue to do to help farmers throughout the world. Enjoy my conversation with Emily Stone.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Emily, how are you?
I am doing well, thank you.
So how long has it been since I've seen you? Belize. When were you in Belize? What years?
I lived there 2010 until 2014.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I remember dandelion chocolate. It was a trip through dandelion chocolate. I found it last minute. It was like in the middle of February or something. I left my whole family. I needed to get away from the kids. And I went down there, just loved chocolate. That was kind of like my only background. I did love farming. I was like into farming, but not cacao farming. And, stayed at Cotton Tree Lodge, which I always tell the story that they upgraded me to that jungle thing. I came in a day early because everyone else is coming from California. So they're like, oh, we're going to upgrade you to the jungle lodge out.
Oh, the jungle cabana.
Yes. Well, I was alone. Yes. And I didn't know what a howler monkey was. And so the guy walked me out there with the walkie-talkie at the time. And I remember being, oh, this is so cool. I'm alone. I'm out here in the jungle. And then all of a sudden I heard the velociraptors coming through the woods at me. And I had the light was on above the bed. And I remember like, I'm a sitting duck. Like I turned the light off and I'm sitting there. I was a wreck. I was a complete wreck. And I'm like, should I use the walkie-talkie? I never did. I made it through the night. They eventually calmed down, but I looked at them at the front desk like, you upgraded me? Like there was no warning. There was no warning. But I have to say, I always talk about that experience because it was one of the greatest experiences. But I have to say, one of the most memorable parts of that trip was meeting you and watching you in action. I was just like in awe about what you were doing and the level of knowledge and passion and determination. And I was like, you're pretty much changing the industry down here. So tell me about a little bit about your background. Obviously, I read some, but tell me about where you came from, how you got involved in like bring me up to that point where how did you get to Belize and as a young woman saying, I want to take this on.
Sure. Yeah. I that is such an amazing story, first of all, about the jungle cabana. I did not remember that. And
Did you stay in it ever?
no.
Okay. You were you were probably warned.
Yeah. No, I had a little cabana that I built on top of our cacao fermentation building, and so I would stay there. But yeah, it's in the jungle. It's all in the jungle. All of country's in the jungle, but that jungle cabana is a special place. So it's so cool that
They
you have.
closed it down, by the way, because I spoke to, I did an interview with them actually. One of the women who, I forgot her name, who manages the place or, is there. And
Yep.
she was there when we were there, which, and she's like, oh, yeah, we closed it down. I'm like, I wonder why.
Oh my
Although it
God.
was special.
The howler monkeys really will transport you to like another time and place for sure.
Especially when they're perched above you in the middle of the night. So,
Mhm.
but go ahead. I want to hear about you.
Yeah, so and thanks for that kind introduction. It's so sweet. And it's great to be reconnected. So my story started very similar to probably many people in that I just loved chocolate. I really loved chocolate. I did my first ever independent school project as like a 10-year-old on desserts around the world. I wrote a cookbook, compiling recipes from different cultures, how they think about dessert, what they make, obviously with a heavy chocolate focus. And then in seventh grade, I did my science project on cupcakes. When is a cupcake not a cupcake? I made about 30 batches of cupcakes to see what the ingredients do. And so I've always been really like freakishly passionate about desserts and
And you were
baking.
just self-inspired to do
Mhm.
that? Like, was anyone encouraging that passion,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I grew up baking with my grandmother and my mom, so I definitely inherited my love of sweets from my maternal lineage, and that's still a part of our relationship today.
That's good.
My mom is now the grandmother baking with my kids, and
Oh,
so it's really sweet to see that, just because I now see how formative that actually was in my own life.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, as a kid going through school, growing up, I always knew that I loved sweets. And so I thought if I wanted to work in desserts, I'd probably have to be a baker. And that wasn't exactly where my interest really lay, especially at that point.
Yeah.
I was a teenager, I was going to school, I got very involved in social justice and activism. So I started the Amnesty International chapter at my high school. I went on to go to college in Washington, D.C., where it was like right after 9/11, and I studied Arabic because I was really hungry to get out of the bubble of my like Metro West Boston, very white bread suburban upbringing and experience the world. And
What was it though that was like moving you in that direction? Like, was there something you saw? Was it did you travel somewhere? What inspired that eagerness to get involved in that? Because not everyone does. So there's something that
yeah,
was driving you.
I was very lucky to travel quite a bit as a kid, and that was really something that my parents, focused on a lot. That was how they would, treat us as kids. We'd go on adventures. I was very lucky and privileged to have access to that travel. But I think, my mom in particular, she went to medical school. She did her like an internship in Cote d'Ivoire in a rural area of Cote d'Ivoire. She had originally gone to medical school in Italy without knowing how to speak Italian. So I
Impressive.
think
Wow.
some of my, I think I get some of my just like innate desire for adventure from her specifically. But yeah, traveling, different places, it just became very clear to me, I think, from a really early age that what I was experiencing and what my peers were experiencing in suburban, middle class, upper middle class America was not the reality for most of the world. And I just had an innate curiosity and desire for what would eventually become sort of a desire for justice and a desire for trying to create more equity and equality in the world.
All right, so you went to school in Washington,
Yeah, so I went
and
to school in
then
Washington, D.C., and then I studied Arabic, and I was supposed to go study abroad in Lebanon, but then a war broke out between Lebanon and Israel, and so that program was canceled, and I ended up getting rerouted to southern Spain because they had an Arabic program. And so I ended up in southern Spain and fell back in love with the Spanish language. And so that kind of, you know, fast forward the decade or so later, I ended up in Central America. That was kind of where that started to really
okay,
develop. I had spent a summer in Honduras as a kid. And so, yeah, there are a number of experiences I'd say kind of contributed to this. But then right after or my senior year in college, I did an internship at an organization called Global Trade Watch, which is part of Public Citizen, which is an advocacy nonprofit. And it was there that I really, I came into that organization wanting to learn more about how trade sort of interacts in the international development space. But I was a total newbie. I had no idea kind of what I was getting into. And I was just blown away at the reality of how much international trade and international trade policy, which we're living today in tariffs, can really influence the lives of, everyday families around the world. And it was this sort of this segment of international relations I hadn't really thought about very much. But as soon as I got a taste of it, I was like, this is really interesting. And so that was sort of my first bite into the trade side of
okay,
international work. And then, but I didn't stay there. I got detoured a little bit. My boss at that organization had gone through a training program for environmental activism called Green Corps, which is a really fascinating program for anyone aspiring to be a professional activist. It is a year-long program that is very competitive, and you basically get, at least it was when I was there, I think it was like 9% of applicants, are admitted or something like that. And it ends up being like a group of 20, 25 people who go through a training program that is your trainers are like the executive director of the Sierra Club and Greenpeace and you have congressional representatives come to talk to you about lobbying. And so you basically get this like crash course for a couple weeks about how to make change and build movements. And then you get kind of airdropped into different places around the country to try to build a campaign really quickly and achieve an objective. And so I did
wow,
4 places. I went to Mobile, Alabama, Houston, Texas, Chicago, and then Portland, Maine. And a couple of the campaigns that I worked on there were corporate campaigns. So they were focused on basically advocating for companies to change their practices in through different ways. And that job led me into an environmentally responsible investment firm where I had a job as a shareholder advocate. And so my job was basically to organize within the cap tables of publicly traded companies to raise awareness of issues and then push for change, really from the lens of shareholder risk and shareholder value. And
okay,
that was where I came back into chocolate because this mutual fund, this company was invested into Hershey. And so there were a group of investors organizing to pressure Hershey to become fair trade certified. And as I became involved in that work and started doing research and reading reports about how fair trade certification works, I was just, I think, disappointed to see some of the failures in the certification model. And I was blown away as a chocolate lover by how little I knew about how this product actually, is produced, is farmed, how the supply chain works. This was in 2009, 2010. It was right around the time where headlines were coming out around forced labor and child labor in the cocoa supply chain. And I was like, holy cow, if I'm a chocolate lover and I like an international person and I don't know about this, like probably like nobody really knows about this. Like people who love chocolate don't really know about this. And so that was kind of the beginning of me pulling the thread. I then started going down different rabbit holes around, where is cacao growing? If it comes from the Americas, why don't I ever see, uh, you know, chocolate bars in the supermarket that say Honduras or Mexico or, anywhere from Central America on them? What's been going on in chocolate all these years where it seems like the industry's come so far from its roots? And so I got really interested in Central America in particular because of, what I had come to understand as sort of the historic importance of cacao and chocolate in their culture and just the total lack of market presence that region had in the United States at that time. And so I literally Googled chocolate Central America. That's how I started my business. And like only now can I say that. In the first 5 years, I was like, I can't tell anyone that ever. Um,
I think it's great.
and that led me through sort of a original. Cotton Tree Chocolate in Belize was one of the first sort of companies that came up when I Googled that
Yep.
because making chocolate in Central America. So I emailed them. Basically, I sent out this like form email to anyone who I came across, and I said, hey, I've got this experience. I'm really interested in doing like an internship. I want to get to learn more about cacao and chocolate in Central America and see what can happen. And Cotton Tree Chocolate got back to me and said, we're not really looking for interns, but Cotton Tree Lodge is, they have an internship program. And actually, Chris Crowell, the founder, is in Boston today. If you want to go meet him for lunch at South Station, you can catch him before he takes his 2 o'clock train. So I
Wow.
went that day to go meet him.
Wow.
It was crazy. This whole thing happened
So
really, really
he
quickly.
owned the lodge, but
Correct.
there was a like a
Yes, there's a
chocolate
chocolate
or
company.
was it a farm? Or was it a it was just
No, so
okay.
Cotton Tree Chocolate is Jeff Pizzina is the owner of Cotton Tree Chocolate, and he and Chris were the founders and owners at that time of Cotton Tree Lodge.
Okay.
And so basically Chris had just like forwarded my email onto his partner, Jeff. Or no, Jeff forwarded my email onto Chris, and then Chris was at South Station. And so I went to go meet with him and I was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in doing like a hospitality internship. I really want to get into cacao and chocolate. He's like, well, then you got to go meet Alex Whitmore at Taza Chocolate because he was just in Belize at the lodge last month. He and Jeff are like trying to cook up this idea to do something with farmers in Belize. Like maybe you should talk to him. So I set up a meeting with Alex. I go over to meet him because Taza's in Boston. So I go to meet with Alex during another lunch break. And he, what was really interesting to me about Taza had come up in my Google searching already because they were one of the first bean to bar chocolate makers in the United States.
Yes.
A
Yeah.
real pioneer in not just bean to bar chocolate production, but also in sourcing specialty cacao, paying higher prices for better quality, focusing on transparency, on direct relationships. And that to me had really stood out as a path forward for the systemic kind of ills that were starting to become really visible in these symptoms
Yep.
of a broken industry.
Yep.
And so I was really interested in speaking with him and just hearing that he had been in Belize. I was like, perfect, I'm going to set up a meeting. So went to go meet with him, and he shared with me that it was incredibly difficult for him to source high quality organic cacao from smallholder farmers. The supply chain really had not yet been set up for import into the United States, or even really in terms of export from producing countries. So he had built direct relationships with growers in the Dominican Republic and in Mexico. But he was like personally, going down there and trying to figure out how to make it work. Um, and at the same time, what was available to him if he wasn't doing that was basically, there was certified organic cacao available in the marketplace, but it typically was not very good quality. Organic was considered more of just like this stable market that'll pay a premium or at least a base price, no matter what the quality is. And so sometimes the lower quality stuff would be getting into the organic or fair trade, certified exports. And or the other option he would have access to was um, from a plantation, like certified organic from a very large farm, and that just wasn't as aligned with the values that he was trying to sort of inspire in his company. And he really wanted to be sourcing from smallholder growers. Smallholder farmers produce about 90% of the world's cocoa. That number is shifting as more large farms get started, but this is an industry that really relies very heavily, ultimately, on the well-being of so many millions, over 5 million smallholder cacao growing families globally. And so, um, he had shared that he had just been to Belize, that there was this, this chocolate guy, Jeff, from Cotton Tree, who had a chocolate company there and had been working with farmers. And the way the industry was working in Belize at that time was, as you might remember from your visit there, it used to be that farmers would go, their farms would be basically 30 to 2 hours walking from their homes, which are in these rural, remote villages around the Toledo district and South Stand Creek district in Belize. They would go to the farm, harvest, crack open the pods, have to carry it on their backs, literally, to their homes. And then they would have fermentation boxes set up either like just inside their home or just under like on a front porch kind of thing, or that's basically it. And then so they would put the cacao into their fermentation boxes. It's a week-long process that requires pretty tight control over the introduction of oxygen after the anaerobic period, and then, moving the cacao consistently on a protocol to get to a desired flavor profile, basically. And then
Yep.
there's a 1 to 3 week drying process, depending on the weather. And a couple families had solar drying, small solar dryers. But most families were drying cacao on like a piece of zinc roof outside their house, or like a small cement slab that maybe they had around their house.
Yep.
And what this meant for the families was, they'd already did all this hard work of farming cacao and harvesting it and bringing it, back to the community from the farm. And then they couldn't just sell it. They had to process it. And this would take time away from other income generating activities. It often meant like the women would often be very involved in it, but they would sometimes need help, with if they're moving a bunch of cacao from one box to another or picking stuff up off the
Yep.
drying floor. And then there was exposure to the elements. So, wind, rain, chickens, other pests, mold.
Yep.
And so after, if they're able to get the cacao through the fermentation and drying, then they have to bag it up, put it into buckets, bring it on the bus into the buying depot in Punta Gorda, which was only open 1 day a week for buying. Then they would have to stand in line with their buckets and bags of cacao for the manager to do a cut test on their cacao. They would, basically do the guillotine cut test, open it up, and if the cacao had mold or wasn't fermented well, it would get rejected. And they would literally have to then bring it back, pay to bring it back on the bus, and either eat it themselves, try to sell it to a neighbor over the border in Guatemala. So it really wasn't working. And, Alex from Taza had just been down there and was like, this cacao looks super interesting. The genetics, we didn't really know about the genetics at the time, but the instinct was like, it's got to be kind of interesting because this is the Selva Maya region of, Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala, where so much of cacao's, original cultivation was done. The heirloom
Yep.
Criollo cacao that was the coding of the genome of cacao was done with heirloom cacao from the protected areas in Belize. And so, yeah, very, clearly very interesting stuff, but the industry wasn't working. And so, Alex was like, yeah, I'm really interested in buying this cacao. Jeff and I are going to figure out if we can like set something up so that we can kind of disrupt, the existing industry and try to improve it for the farmers so that we can build a better future and, make something that will really work over the long term. And I was like, sign me up. So I quit my job that day. And a couple of weeks later, I was on a plane to Belize. And Alex was with me for the first, so Alex came with me for 4 days. He was sick as a dog for half of them. So it was a real crash course in like learning fermentation and drying. I had no experience. And I had never been to Belize before. It was just this like passion for, innovation, and really trying to build something new in an industry that just seemed to be ripe for innovation and new ideas.
Excellent. So I have a few questions. So when you went down there, was it called Maya Mountain at the
No,
time? No. So you
no,
were more cotton tree.
Nope,
Oh, you aren't.
not
Okay.
that either. So we were, so when we first started, the company was called Moho River Cacao
Oh,
because the
okay. I saw
connections
that name. Okay.
on the banks of the Moho River. We quickly found out, however, that mojo is not the best word for a cacao company because it literally means mold in Spanish. And in Creole,
Oh.
it means something worse. And so
Oh.
we did not, I changed the name pretty quickly once I
Okay.
started, learning that. So we started the business in 2010 and then we became Maya Mountain Cacao in 2012.
Okay. So before we talk a little bit more about that, talk to me because this is a very, people know the word fair trade.
Hmm.
And I remember when I met you and you were talking, you used the terms direct trade a lot when we were down there. I know
Hmm.
that might have evolved, but talk to us about fair trade. What makes it fair, and what are the challenges with that kind of forced us to make some of these changes.
Yeah.
They know that because a lot of people think, oh, fair trade, they that's been marketed in a way that, people welcome that. They
Yeah.
think, oh, they see that endorsement and they think we're good.
Yeah.
Is that the case? I, you know,
Yeah. So, I'm going to zoom out to like 10,000 foot view for a second and just talk about kind of overall how cocoa is traded. So, cocoa is traded as a commodity. It's a soft commodity. You can check the futures market online or in the Wall Street Journal every morning. It's mostly traded as paper contracts. And in order for
okay.
that to happen, there's a whole industry, a financial industry that's been built around soft commodities like cocoa and coffee. It's really an inheritance from the colonial structures that were present before the sort of modern neoliberal model. But anyways, so in order for cocoa to be traded as a commodity, the definition of a commodity is that it's fungible. One is exactly equal to the other. So cocoa from Ghana is exactly the same as cocoa from Peru, which is exactly the same as cocoa from Indonesia, et cetera, et cetera. And what that does in economics is when there's competition, basically there's no differentiated competition between producers because the market views all of their products as the same. And so it's very difficult for producers to actually make more money in the commodity system because you know, there's not much value differentiation that you can do. And so the fair trade model was really built upon the commodity system, and it doesn't break away from it in any way. There's no focus on quality, there's no focus on the actual value of the product itself. So just from like a philosophical perspective, I think it's an important place to start is like the problem isn't necessarily with like fair trade certification. The problem is with the commodity trading
Okay.
system of cocoa and this
Okay.
just over commoditization of the crop, where now it's all cocoa is the same, basically, no matter where it's from. And there are small country premiums and differentials, but ultimately it's all basically treated as the same.
Okay.
And in fair trade, the way the fair trade model works, fair trade certification, is let's say a producer group decides to get fair trade certified. So they will pay a certifier to come and inspect their organization, and then they have to pay a certification fee. And then they have to, comply with certain mostly administrative practices in terms of how are they organized, what's their governance as an organization, what is the transparency and sort of farmer representation within the organization, how are farm workers paid within the organization, on members' farms. But again, nothing about quality and no real differentiation. It's once you're fair trade certified, great. Now you're part of this fair trade certified commodity cocoa pool. So it's expensive for farmers to get certified. And then once they get certified, in order for that cocoa to eventually be sold as fair trade chocolate, every actor along the chain also has to get certified and pay into ultimately what is like a marketing plan, like a marketing scheme. And so, I think fair trade has been very successful at building the marketing scheme, but for a chocolate maker to then sell and benefit from that marketing, they also have to pay a pretty, hefty fee to fair
Absolutely.
trade in order to be able to sell the cocoa beans that were produced as fair trade chocolate. There are whole other levels in there of, mass balance, et cetera. We don't need to get into that. What does the farmer get for having made that decision to become fair trade certified? They get a premium of $240 per ton to the cooperative. The world, like the futures price for cocoa right now is around $8,000 per ton. Um, that's a huge increase from where it used to be, which was around $3,000 per ton or lower. But even on $3,000 per ton, a premium of $240 per ton is nothing. And there's actually no requirement of like that money, that those premium funds, they're called premiums, that they need to be paid directly to farmers in cash. So a lot of cooperatives will use them for things like trainings, education for farmers, maybe like improving the cooperative's facilities, buying a new truck. You could use it for building new infrastructure to support farmers or to support the processing. They could use it for community projects like school investments in schools or water projects or any number of things. But, and I will say, so the cooperative has to vote on how the premium funds get spent. And so the idea is that if it's in the interest of farmers for the premiums to be, spent on them, then that's how the cooperative will vote. But that doesn't always happen. And there are a lot of examples of political, basically just like the premium's gone wrong. And in reality, typically less than 50% of that premium ever makes its way to farmers in terms of cash. And so a farmer in a fair trade cooperative may ultimately not make any more money by selling fair trade than if they're selling conventional cocoa. Um, and it costs them money to participate. So it really is a challenging system. And it has, I think the intentions of fair trade, again, are very admirable. I think a lot of the work that they've done and continue to do is really important. They're doing a lot of soul searching around kind of what's the future for them and how can they stay, um, kind of relevant and how can they improve. But also, like I did start Uncommon Cacao as a kind of alternative to that, where we're not, connected to the commodity, to the futures market directly. We don't pay like fixed premiums. It doesn't cost producers any money to work with us. Our vision is to pay growers higher prices for better quality and to have transparent trade across the value chain so that everyone across the value chain, whether you're a farmer, an exporter, a chocolate maker, or a consumer, like you can actually see how the money flows in Uncommon Cacao's supply chain. We're still the only international cacao trader to do this. We've been doing this for over 10 years. You can go onto our website and you can see the transparent transaction section on every single producer's page. You can read our annual reports. Like we actually publish the prices and margins of all cacao that's sourced throughout our network, farm gate prices, association prices, FOB prices, and the price at which we sell to our customers. And so we're not just asking growers to be transparent, we're also being transparent ourselves and putting our margins out on display because the whole idea is for this to be an alternative to, opaque and kind of ineffective.
Okay. I want to talk about why you're the only one, but hold that thought for a second. Go back to Maya Mountain
Mhm.
because you you walked into an environment that, okay, these farmers were being rejected, there were quality issues, etc. Were there cooperatives down there that were helping were quote unquote helping these farmers? Like, what kind of environment did you enter into, and how did you make that change? And like, what were you doing with these farmers? Because you did a lot of work with these farmers to
Mhm.
work on quality, and
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about that because I think that obviously was probably, a stepping stone to where you are today. So I think it's really
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really came into this work with the community organizer's sort of approach and perspective. Um, when I arrived in Belize, so the buyer that I had mentioned that had the depot in Punta Gorda was the only game in town. It was a fair trade organic cacao association, and it had at that point about 20 years of history, very interesting history. Its formation was supported by Green and Blacks when Green and Blacks was the first
Oh,
organic
wow.
chocolate
Okay.
company in the
Yeah.
world back in like the 80s. Or no, sorry, early 90s. And so that was one. So there was, and Hershey had been in Belize before that. So there's
Well,
Belize
you
has
took
a
you
really
took
interesting,
me in the group to a old Hershey farm.
yeah,
I was
yeah,
always wondering what happened because you guys, I think, were taking over that, or you were
we did. And that was, but we're now a couple steps past that.
okay. Yeah, I
We can go
figured
into
that.
that if you want. Yeah. So yeah, it was I started off when I got into Belize, it was a listening tour for the first few months, really. So I didn't have a vehicle when I first got there. I was going around taking the bus, hitchhiking. I even drove a bus at one point, the cotton tree bus. I was like, any way I can get out into the villages, like I need to go meet farmers. I need
Right.
to hear from them. What is their experience working with the association? What's their vision for how things could improve? What do they wish, was happening in the industry? Because I knew nothing, right? All I knew was like, I have a market. I like want to do the work, but it's got to be driven and led by farmers because they're really the main stakeholders of this whole operation. And so I met with lots of farmers, and maybe in the first like week or two, I met with a farmer named Eladio Pop, who you might remember. He has like
I
this
loved
amazing,
Eladio.
yeah.
Eladio will owe like that experience at his farm
hmm
is in my brain. Like it's part of me. I'll never forget that experience. That was impactful.
He's a special guy, and he has a large cacao farm, and so of course he was on the list. And like, we got to go, meet with Eladio. I got to go hear what he has to say and what he thinks about this. So I sat down with him, and he has 15 children, and maybe like six or seven of them sat in the room with me and Eladio while we were having this conversation. And I explained the vision, like we have this chocolate maker who's interested in buying cacao from Belize, but they need it to be centrally fermented. And so what I want to do is start buying wet cacao. I'll come pick it up from you, and we'll at least match the price you're getting for dried cacao, and then our belief is that over time we'll create a better quality product and we'll be able to increase prices, and this will be easier because you won't have to do the fermentation and drying. And it's basically the same pitch I was giving over and over again to farmers. And he was like, "Yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting. I'll give it, I'd be willing to give it a try once you get started. Keep you posted." And one of his sons, Gabrielle, followed me out the door right after that meeting and was like, "Hey, I have worked in the cacao industry. Yeah, I used to work at TCGA. I, have traveled to other countries. I know that this is how they do it in places like Costa Rica. They have centrally fermented cacao, and I'm really excited about this idea. But like, you're gonna need a lot of help. Like, no one's gonna listen to you if you're just, speaking at them the way you were just speaking at us. And I think you need my help to get feedback from the farmers and see if this will really work." He said, "But I'm not willing to like, I don't want to take it. I don't want a job, and like, I can't let you pay me. I want to volunteer and do this because I don't want farmers to think that I'm like being paid by the white person to, try and convince them of something. I'm legit." He was legitimately like, "I want to do this. Like, I've been thinking about this way longer than you have, but like,
Wow.
let's go into this slowly, and like, I need to do this the right way if I'm going to do it." And I was like, "Okay." And so the next day,
What was your reaction to that? Like, what were you thinking at the time?
I was like, I mean, I was so just like combination of like naivete of just like, everyone's gonna be so excited about this. Like, of course it's gonna be great. And then to like his kind of reality check of like, you have to like speak Kekchi or Mopan for people to like actually get excited about this. And we've also been duped before by so many people who've come in with these big visions of, uh, you know, like there was a guy who had come down a few years earlier telling everyone to plant achiote, which is a traditional Mayan spice, annatto. It's like it makes things orange. And so everyone planted all these annatto trees. And then there was no buyer. The guy disappeared before the crop ever came into production. And so that was fresh in everyone's mind. I had no idea. And so, it was like that listening was so important in those early days. And so, Gabrielle and I spent a lot of time together. And I think for the first few weeks, like, I let him be a volunteer. I was like, okay, fine, but like, you're gonna have to let me pay you. Like, I'm not gonna let you just like volunteer. Um, and so, yeah, he volunteered. And then finally, after a few weeks, he was like, okay, I think this is gonna work. And now you can pick me. I was like, great, you're field director. Let's go. And so we were off to
Instant
the races.
title.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. No, he picked it out. That was what he wanted. Great.
Okay.
So he was co-founder, field director, and yeah, we started buying cacao in January of 2011. I remember very clearly, like our first day buying in Silver Creek, we bought like 62 pounds of cacao, and it felt like a huge win. We were like, someone sold us cacao. This is awesome. And we had a super small rustic fermentation and drying facility set up at Cotton Tree. And so everything,
I
we did.
remember. I
Yeah, you
remember that. I
remember
have
that?
pictures of it actually.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was a beautiful little spot. And that was where we got started. So that was, at that point we were like off to the races. We got our first organic certification in place. We exported our first half container in June 2011. We sold it to Taza and also to the Mast Brothers. So they
Oh,
were our
wow.
first clients. Um, and from there, I mean, we grew to be the largest exporter in Belize by like 2014 or so. Then I moved to Guatemala and started a second
Yes.
business there. So yeah, by the time, by 2013, 2014, we were working with what was becoming this like explosively burgeoning bean to bar chocolate world in the United States. So there was like dandelion chocolate, Dick Taylor chocolate, Ritual chocolate, Fruition chocolate, French broad chocolate, Rocca chocolate. Like all of those companies started making bean to bar chocolate in 2010. I don't know what was
Yes.
in the water, but something was in
It
the water.
was. It was
Like all of us.
exploding at that time. It was
All of us just
crazy.
got into cacao and chocolate that year. And so all those companies, I was working with all of those chocolate companies or a big portion of them. And we could not produce enough cacao in Belize. Like we were sold out for years. People were getting on our waiting list thinking like maybe I'll be able to buy it in 2 years. And so it was clear to me that this was working. First of all, in Belize, farmers were really happy with the ability to harvest and sell cacao in the same day. We would come to their doors and we'd pay cash for cacao. We still do. And so, they were happy. We were seeing their incomes, increase, like their revenues, like just based on the sales numbers of what they were selling to us. Like they were motivated, they were taking better care of their farms, they were psyched, they were planting more. We started doing nursery programs and seedling programs. Um, we were hearing anecdotally farmers were like sending their daughters to secondary school for the first time. Like all these positive
That's
impacts
great.
were happening, which was such a dream. And then at the same time, like the demand was off the charts. And so it was clear, like, we really have something here. We got to grow it. So I started like backpacking around Guatemala, exploring different communities there. I had gotten some random like training lists from Cartier, which is an agroforestry, like tropical agronomy university, basically in Costa Rica, that had done a bunch of trainings with Guatemalan farmers. So I got their farmer list and I just started calling, like cold calling people saying like, hi, I live in Belize. Like, I'm interested in coming to visit your farm. What do you think? And I was able to go meet with farmers in Cahabon, which is the like heartland breadbasket of cacao production in Guatemala. And I mean, it was just immediately apparent to me that there was so much potential in Guatemala. Basically 20 times the amount of cacao that was in Belize was already in the ground in Guatemala, and there
Wow.
were no exports. There had been no exports of cacao beans in like over a decade because all of the cacao was being sold into local and regional, like more informal markets. So there were coyotes or like local intermediaries who would have a pickup truck and a scale and they would go around to the villages buying cacao, corn, beans, spices, coffee, whatever farmers had to offer. But there was no transparency on prices. Prices were super volatile, like basically whatever they wanted to pay that day, they would pay. There was no quality control. Pretty much all of the cacao was being washed, because that was what local markets wanted. And so instead of being fermented, which is critical to create the flavor precursors for chocolate, the cacao was just being had the fruit washed off. So all of that,
Wow.
fermentation potential was gone. And then it would just get dried in the sun. And so yeah, that I moved to Guatemala in 2014 and started a business there. And then in 2016 was when we decided to vertically integrate and start importing into the US.
So did who took over the operation in Belize?
Yeah, so Gabrielle took over for like the first 2 years, and then there were some kind of tragic things that happened. He got into a motorcycle accident.
Mm.
He lost his leg. It really impacted his ability to be out in the field and kind of doing the work that he loved. So we started a nonprofit organization that he could helm that would do more sort of farmer projects and work like
Okay.
that. And then he ultimately ended up passing away from stomach cancer.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
so, yeah, it was really a crazy, terrible journey. In a really just kind of side note, but like wild, small world, like closing of the loop. The current managing director of Maya Mountain is Gabrielle's brother-in-law, Jose, who literally lives right next to Eladio. So if you remember Eladio on the hill, like Jose lives right here. And so, yeah, it's like, the pops are back in
That's
the
great.
leadership of Maya Mountain, which is awesome.
That's
Um,
great.
so yeah, and then yeah, we had different a woman named Minnie ran the organization for a little while. So we've gone through, I think, a number of different sort of managing directors since 2010.
That's amazing. Like what you and your team accomplished in those few years is just it's mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, when you reflect back on that, what what do you feel about that time period? Like how do you reflect back on it?
Um, I I like don't know how I did it, to be honest.
That's fair.
I was really
I
like
remember watching you and thinking, how is she doing this? Just being in a new country, and like with like you said, you were coming into farmhouses, talking to people, and you don't know all the history about what's been sold to them,
yeah,
and the impact of that, and just the connections you made and serendipitous connections,
yeah.
it just pretty
I mean, I
amazing.
I think a big part of it was I started the business when I was 25 years old. So I had that like young, fresh, naive energy and this just like grittiness that it was really, I think for me, it was like once I was in Belize for the first few months and started really building these deep human relationships with farmers, with Gabrielle, with other stakeholders, folks I was getting to know in the communities. Um, it was like, okay, well, if I'm starting to build this, like it was becoming clear to me at that moment, like this is not a 1 year gig. This is probably not even a 5 year gig. Like this is now the thing I'm gonna do. And it kind of cemented this like persistent commitment to just doing what I said I was going to do. Like I didn't want to give up. And still 15 years later, I was in Belize 5 times over the last 12 months and I'm still very much involved in the work of Maya Mountain. Although my hope is that it will, you know, within, a reasonable time frame become a locally owned company. Right now it's
Nice.
still, Uncommon Cacao is the largest owner of the business, but I'm working now on a process to move it towards local ownership.
So full circle, Uncommon Cacao. Where are you living now? You came back
Yeah,
to the States.
I'm in the States. Yep, I'm in the States. I'm married. I have two kids. So it's like, yeah, it really has been a wild ride. I live in on the eastern shore of Maryland.
Okay. So you're on the East
Like about
Coast.
an
Okay.
hour East Coast. Yeah. I travel a lot. Uncommon Cacao developed kind of as as a later version of Maya Mountain. As I explained, like we were exporters in Belize and Guatemala, and then in 2016 we vertically integrated. We started importing cacao, and then distributing it. We basically had warehouses. We have warehouses, third-party warehouses that we work with on the East Coast and West Coast of the U.S. We also set up an operation in Europe in 2021.
Oh,
So we
wow.
store cacao in Amsterdam. I have a colleague who lives in Paris who manages our sales and operations there. And we now import cacao from over 17 countries. We are working, indirectly with over 10,000 smallholder farming families. And we supply over 350 chocolate makers globally. And so we ship all over. A lot of our market is still in the United States, but we ship, a growing amount of cacao to the Middle East. It's been amazing to see uh,
Wow.
the growth yeah, it's amazing. I mean, some of the most exquisite chocolate products are being produced in places like Dubai and not the Dubai chocolate.
Oh,
So
yeah, I know. Not
Dubai,
to be
not
confused
that.
with.
Not to
I
be
know.
confused with, like,
Yes.
in quotes, Dubai chocolate. Actually, chocolate makers in Dubai not making Dubai chocolate. Um,
Very good clarification because my,
yeah.
my kids were mentioning that to me. I'm like, what is that?
Yes. Yeah. Such a thing.
That,
Um,
oh my God, I didn't realize the breadth of your company. I'm like, wow, wow. So why is no one else doing what you're doing?
well, so a lot of people are doing what we're doing, I should say. Like, one thing that's been really cool about, my own naivete in starting Maya Mountain and then kind of getting it off the ground and making so many mistakes. I mean, I've made all the mistakes in the book in terms of how to build a specialty cacao origin, how to, all the just entrepreneurship, building a business, international business. I mean, there's so many things to learn. And especially, I just turned 40 this year. I feel like, in the last 15 years, I've gotten an MBA. It's taken me 15 years, but I'm here. I know a lot more than I did 15 years ago. And, you know, it's uh, it's been awesome to see how many people have taken kind of the inspiration from Maya Mountain, from Uncommon, and have built their own versions. And so in places all over the world, like Tanzania, Uganda, Peru, Honduras, Haiti, I mean, so many places have private sector social enterprises very similar to Maya Mountain, not a cooperative, although we also work with a lot of great cooperatives, but this kind of vision of like an entrepreneurial um, approach to building ethical, transparent, very farmer focused supply chains has been really cool to see. And that was part of the motivation I had for, growing into the uncommon cacao model too, was I didn't want to be limited to just buying cacao from Belize and Guatemala. Neither did my customers. There were all these other amazing cacaos that were starting to come to market, that just had their own unique, special characteristics, whether that was the genetics or the terroir or the specific model that was being used, or the location. There's just has so much diversity. I think almost more than any other crop. It has more aromatic compounds than any other food that we consume. It has, just the expressions of cacao and chocolate. I feel like we're still at such an early stage as a society and sort of understanding what's possible with this crop and this product. And so, yeah, there are so many great examples of people doing innovation, innovative work, coming up with new ideas, and I wanted to be able to support them.
I have two final questions for you. One is right now, I mean, I know there's been a lot of volatility with the pricing over the last few years, actually.
Yeah.
And then what do you feel right now or going into, the rest of this year into 2026 is one of the biggest challenges that, your company is facing?
Mm.
And then what is an exciting project that you're working on? Something that, I don't know, could be a new place you're sourcing from, whatever it is, like what is exciting you?
Yeah. So, cool. The first one, I think the challenge, I mean, so liquidity has been a challenge for the sector since we started to see the futures market rally, exponentially the way that it did starting at the end of 2023 and then throughout 2024. The basically the futures market quadrupled, grew by 300%. So it went from around $3,000 per year, which is what cocoa had been trading at for the last 40 plus years, to reaching peaks of over $12,000 per ton. And so, yeah, $3,000 per ton to over $12,000 per ton. And it's basically, it has not come down even close to 3,000, hasn't come down even to 5,000.
Right.
We've basically been between $7,000 and $10,000 per ton over the last 2 years or last year and a half. And that has caused huge liquidity challenges for so many in the cocoa space. Because, of course, it's great for farmers to be making 4 times the price that they were in the past. It's critically important. We want those prices, to stay. I personally am in favor of high cocoa prices for sure. The challenge is the high cocoa prices have been driven by supply scarcity, which means there's even more competition for cacao. And so what many, companies like Maya Mountain, or especially in places like Peru, Ecuador, Uganda, where they're bigger countries, there's much more competition, is in order to even get access to buying the wet cacao, you have to pay the market plus a premium. And you have to have the cash available right away, or you even have to prepay farmers in some cases. And so, it's just caused this kind of domino effect throughout the chain of, everyone's pre-financing. We've been pre-financing basically every one of our partners, which means we have to pay for the cacao up to like 10 months before it even lands in our
Wow.
warehouse. And then it can take us, a few months to 6 months to sell it once it lands there. And so, cash conversion cycles are just insane. And so, we're trying to figure out how to tighten those. And I think we've been successful in many cases, but it's definitely been a challenge. And it's a challenge for everyone, just access to capital. Um, and something I'm really excited about. Oh my gosh, there are some really, really cool new beans that we're working with this year. We brought in 2 new beans. One is from the island of Principe, which is part of Sao Tome and Principe.
Oh,
So it's
you
a
had a blog post on this, I think.
exactly,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, so it's where cocoa was actually originally introduced into Africa from
Wow.
Brazilian or Portuguese colonizers who had, come into Brazil, taken Forastero, Amelinado genetics. And so farms are super old. The genetics are really, ancient in modern day context at least. And the most of the cacao that comes from that country comes from the island of Sao Tome. But Principe is a smaller island, and the industry there had been completely abandoned. Basically, there was a small amount of cacao leaving the island, but farms had really not been well taken care of. And there's a new B Corp that's working on that island to uh, revitalize production, working with farmers. They have their own farm as well, and they've gotten bird-friendly certification there. And so it's just such an exciting kind of opportunity to see the industry kind of reborn in this place, where it can be done in this really kind of values and yeah, values driven way.
Excellent. Wow. I'm so grateful that we had this conversation because it's just so nice to see this. Like I saw it kind of at the beginning, and now looking at everything that the impact that you and your company has had is pretty amazing. So thank you for all you do, and definitely want to stay in touch.
Sounds great. Let's do another one of these in a few years.
Yes, we
No,
definitely have. Yeah, well, who knows what's going to happen by then. But thank you, Emily. It was a pleasure speaking to you again, and good luck with everything. Okay.
thank you so much, and it was such a pleasure speaking with you as well.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time.